You wake up every day with a weight no one sees. You carry responsibilities, emotions, unspoken pain, and yet you show up. You keep going. You hold space for everyone else, even when no one holds space for you. This is the silent battle of a woman with no support. But what if I told you that the loneliness you feel isn't the end of your story? What if it's actually the beginning? What if your silence is not abandonment, but alignment? A sacred space created so you can finally hear the voice that matters most, your own. You've been conditioned to survive, to be strong, to be dependable, but rarely to rest, rarely to receive, rarely to ask, what do I need? Somewhere along the way, the world taught you that your value is in what you give, how much you can endure, how well you can manage. And that conditioning runs deep. It lives in your nervous system. It's coded into your breath, your posture, your decisions. But here's the truth. You are allowed to outgrow that pattern. You are allowed to stop surviving and start creating. You are allowed to choose yourself, even when no one else does. The most profound transformation doesn't begin with applause or support. It begins in the quiet, in the breakdown, in the moments when you realize no one is coming to rescue you and you finally stop waiting. That's when you remember you were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to rise from the ashes, from the silence, from the loneliness, from the forgotten corners of your own heart. You rise when you stop outsourcing your worth to those who could never see you clearly. You rise when you stop giving your energy to people who drain it. You rise when you stop begging for support and become the source. When no one validates you, you learn to validate yourself. When no one comforts you, you learn to sit with your emotions, feel them fully, and let them move through you like waves. When no one understands you, you learn that your journey is not meant to be understood by everyone, only honored by you. That is not weakness. That is mastery, emotional mastery, energetic sovereignty. That's what it means to become a conscious woman, rooted in presence, not performance, grounded in truth, not expectation, anchored in self-worth, not external approval. The silence has never been empty. It's been sacred space for your awakening. The tears you cried when no one noticed, they watered your becoming. The nights you spent holding yourself, they built resilience no one can take from you. The boundaries you now create, they are proof that you've learned to listen to your own soul. You are no longer shrinking to be accepted. You are no longer abandoning yourself to feel safe. You are no longer pretending to be okay just to make others comfortable. You've stopped running from the discomfort. You're breathing into it. You're learning how to regulate your emotions, not to numb yourself, but to elevate. You're learning to choose peace, not because life is easy, but because your energy is precious. You're no longer available for the chaos that once felt familiar. You're no longer addicted to being everything for everyone. You're coming home to yourself. That's where the healing begins. Not when people change, but when you do. Not when the world gives you what you need, but when you realize it's already within you. You need to prove your worth through pain. You don't need to keep sacrificing your well-being just to be seen. You don't need to earn love by carrying what was never yours. You get to be supported by yourself first. You get to choose relationships that feel like peace, not performance. You get to take up space, to rest, to receive, to heal. Because this journey is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to be small. Before you forgot that your power isn't in being everything to everyone. It's in being everything to yourself. And when you rise from that place, when you source your strength from within, you become a force no one can ignore. To the woman walking this path alone, you are not broken. You are becoming. You are not invisible. You are awakening. And you are not unsupported. You are finally learning to support yourself in ways no one else ever could. And that is your freedom. That is your power. That is your return to self. There is something sacred that happens when a woman sits in the stillness of her own emotional isolation. It's the moment where the distractions fall away, the external noise fades, and she's left with the rawness of herself. No masks, no roles, no performances, just her. And in that space, something inside her begins to stir. At first, it feels like pain, the kind of pain that has no name, only weight. It lives in her chest, in her gut, in the aching corners of her heart. But if she stays with it long enough, if she doesn't run, distract, or numb, she begins to see it for what it really is: a signal, a doorway, a beginning. Because emotional isolation is never just about being alone. It's about being invited inward. And in the stillness of that space, something remarkable is waiting: the blueprint of her true self. See, we've been taught to fear isolation, conditioned to believe that silence means something's wrong. But what if silence is sacred? What if the lack of support is not punishment, but preparation? Life, in its infinite wisdom, often removes the noise so we can finally hear the signal. And the signal is always calling us back to the inner sanctuary, to the space where transformation actually happens, not in the approval of others, not in their praise, their validation, their comfort, but in our presence, in our willingness to meet ourselves fully. The woman who has no one to lean on is not lost. She is being shown her own strength. She is being initiated into a version of herself that does not need to be rescued, because she is learning to rescue herself. This is not about becoming hardened. This is not about rejecting help or closing your heart. It's about remembering that your emotional center cannot be outsourced, that your nervous system is yours to regulate, that your emotions are yours to honor, that your truth is not negotiable just because others can't hold it. In the quiet, in the solitude, in the ache of feeling unseen. And if she accepts it, she begins the process of becoming someone entirely new. She begins awakening. Because awakening doesn't always come through joy or inspiration. Sometimes it comes through heartbreak, through the weight of carrying everything alone, through the fatigue of constantly showing up for others with no one showing up for her. And when the woman finally stops looking outward, when she turns inward with intention, everything changes. She realizes she doesn't need to be filled. She needs to be reconnected to her breath, to her body, to her truth. She realizes that emotional isolation can be the most fertile ground for deep, permanent, quantum transformation. In that space, she begins to question old stories like, I'm only valuable when I'm needed, or I have to earn love through sacrifice. She starts to see how those stories have kept her trapped, kept her exhausted, kept her small, and she begins to rewrite them, not with words, but with presence, with breath, with energy. That's when she starts activating new neural pathways, new emotional frequencies. That's when the nervous system begins to shift. So when her biology changes to match her new beliefs. And she doesn't just feel better, she becomes different. Not because someone saved her, but because she remembered her own power. And that's the heart of it. The power she seeks outside already lives within her. It always has. It's just been buried beneath layers of survival, performance, and unmet needs. The world taught her to disconnect from it, to trade it for approval, to hand it away in exchange for being loved. And so she did. She learned to be what others needed her to be: the good daughter, the loyal partner, the dependable friend. She gave and gave, hoping someone would see her, hoping someone would stay, but they didn't. Or they did, but not fully. And eventually she realized that the love she was seeking would never be sustainable until it came from her own source. So she began the work, the internal excavation, not to fix herself, but to remember who she was before the conditioning, before the roles, before the compromises. She began to listen to the soft inner knowing, the one that said, you are enough, even when no one claps for you. She began to slow down, to notice the breath, to regulate her nervous system, not to survive the next emotional wave, but to ride it with grace, to feel safe in her own body, safe in her own truth, safe in her own solitude. And in that safety, in that grounded awareness, she found access to a field of intelligence far beyond logic. She found her essence. And when a woman reconnects to her essence, she becomes unstoppable, not because she's loud or fearless or bold, but because she's clear. Her energy becomes coherent. Her heart becomes aligned. Her mind no longer lives in the past. She stops rehearsing pain, stops anticipating abandonment, stops shrinking to be loved, She reclaims every part of herself she once gave away and calls it home. The power within her isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It whispers. It invites. It radiates. And that radiance can't be faked. It's the radiance of a woman who knows who she is. A woman who has sat with her shadows and made peace with them. A woman who no longer needs others to see her. She starts attracting different experiences, not because the world changed, but because her frequency did. She becomes magnetic, not to chaos, but to peace. Not to takers, but to mirrors. Not to pain, but to resonance. She is no longer chasing. She is no longer proving. She is embodying. And in that embodiment, she becomes a living transmission of healing. Not only for herself, but for every woman still stuck in the cycle of waiting to be saved. The journey inward is not always easy, but it's always worth it, because on the other side of emotional isolation is emotional sovereignty. On the other side of pain is presence. And on the other side of surviving alone is thriving from within. When she remembers that, she doesn't just break patterns, she breaks timelines. She ends legacies of silence. She stops trauma from being passed down. She becomes the origin point of a new reality, one built not on lack, but on love, not on fear, but on frequency, not on being seen, but on being self-sourced. At some point, a woman who has lived her life catering to others begins to feel the weight of her own absence. It doesn't come all at once. It comes slowly, quietly, through moments of deep fatigue, suppressed anger, and invisible grief. She smiles when she's supposed to, shows up when she's needed, and gives even when she's empty. But over time, her nervous system, her biology, her soul begins to whisper the truth. This is not sustainable. This is not who you truly are. That whisper, though soft at first, carries the seeds of revolution. And when she finally listens, truly listens, the shift begins. The cycle of self-abandonment is learned. It's not her fault. It's embedded in culture, passed down in language, modeled by women before her who believed love had to be earned, who believed that silence was safer than truth, and giving everything away was the price of being loved. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's natural. Just because it's what she saw doesn't mean it's what she must become. The moment she recognizes that people-pleasing is not love, it's a trauma response, a deep crack forms in the foundation of her conditioning. A crack that light can finally pour through. The nervous system is intelligent. It remembers everything. It encodes every time she felt rejected for speaking up, every time she chose peace over authenticity, every moment she was told that her needs were too much. It becomes hypervigilant, scanning for danger, shaping her behavior around what feels safe, even if that safety costs her her truth. But here's the miracle. Neuroplasticity means she can rewire it. She can teach her body that her truth is not dangerous, that her needs are sacred, that her presence doesn't need to be small to be accepted. And that shift begins with awareness. When she brings awareness to her triggers, not to judge, but to observe, she creates space. When she notices the tightness in her chest before she says yes when she wants to say no, or the lump in her throat when she swallows her feelings to keep the peace, she begins to reconnect. That reconnection is the first step, because healing doesn't mean the old responses vanish overnight. It means she learns to pause, to breathe, to choose differently. In that pause, she reclaims her power. She realizes she doesn't have to run the old program. She can write new code. Every time she chooses to regulate her emotions rather than react or suppress, she strengthens her connection to self. Every time she honors her boundaries, she signals to her nervous system, we are safe, we are allowed to exist. And slowly the body starts trusting again. Slowly the need to perform dissolves. Slowly the need to abandon herself to belong becomes unnecessary. That's when the nervous system begins operating not from fight or flight, but from regulation, coherence, harmony. And when her biology is in coherence, her energy becomes magnetic. She no longer needs to chase support. She attracts it, not because she demands it, but because she embodies it. She stops betraying herself for crumbs of attention. She stops twisting herself into who she thinks people want her to be. She stops shrinking in relationships that ask her to disconnect from her inner knowing. Instead, she reclaims space, not just physically, but energetically. She begins to radiate. She learns to love herself, not through perfection, but through presence. And in that presence, she breaks the pattern that once said you must suffer to be seen, the pattern that said you must be small to be safe. No more. She chooses differently now. And when she stops searching for someone else to regulate her pain, to carry her emotions, to validate her worth, something radical happens. She moves from being a support seeker to being self-sourced, not in a hardened way, not in a I don't need anyone way, but in a way that says, I no longer abandon myself. This is the alchemy, the moment when a woman becomes her own anchor, her own refuge, her own healer. And it doesn't mean she isolates. It means she stops outsourcing her emotional stability. To be self-sourced is to be energetically sovereign. It's to be in relationship with others without losing yourself. It's to be generous without depleting. It's to be open without leaking energy. She begins to choose connection over attachment, truth over performance, presence over people pleasing. And the more she honors herself, the more the world begins to shift around her. The chaos that once felt normal becomes unbearable. The relationships that once drained her lose their grip. The versions of her that were built on survival start to dissolve. And from that space, new patterns emerge. She learns to receive, not because she's desperate, but because she's worthy. She learns to speak up, not to convince, but to express. She learns to rest, not because she's earned it, but because rest is her right. Her entire frequency changes because she's no longer running on the energy of fear, abandonment, or lack. She's running on presence, alignment, and truth. And that energy, that embodiment, calls in a different world. She may still walk alone at times. She may still feel the pang of being misunderstood, but it no longer breaks her. It no longer defines her because she has become the source. She has become the safety. And she knows that the love she was seeking was never outside of her. It was always waiting within. When she found it, truly found it, everything shifted. Her decisions, her desires, her direction. She no longer lives to be chosen. She chooses herself. She no longer lives to be rescued. She walks herself home again and again. In the end, this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who she was before the world told her she had to prove her worth. And when she lives from that place, when she breathes from that place, she becomes a lighthouse for others, not by saving them, not by shrinking for them, but by standing in her truth and radiating from it. That is the real power, the power of the woman who stopped running and started remembering, who stopped asking for permission and started giving herself grace, who stopped being afraid of her own power and finally became it. You see, the woman who fights in silence is not weak. She is a warrior in the quantum field, not because she wants to be, but because she had to be. And that's where the transformation begins. Because when no one comes to save you, you realize you were never meant to be saved. You were meant to remember, to awaken, to create a new identity, one that no longer depends on the external to feel whole. You were taught that support comes from outside, that validation must be earned, that worth is something given by others. But that's an illusion, an outdated program running in your subconscious. And today we break that program. You are not broken. You are not invisible. You are becoming. Because what if your loneliness was divine? What if your isolation was sacred? What if the silence wasn't abandonment, but alignment? When you feel unsupported, that is life's way of removing distractions so you can finally hear your own voice. That whisper that says you are more powerful than you believe. You are more loved than you know. You are more whole than you've ever been told. Every time you sat in the dark and didn't give up, you were building light. Every time you cried in silence and still showed up, you were rewriting your story. Every time you gave love without receiving it, you were becoming love itself. And that version of you, the one who survived the emotional drought, she is not your broken self. She is your awakened self. This world taught you to expect disappointment. to silence your needs, to call exhaustion a badge of honor. But today, you choose differently. Today, you come home to yourself. You regulate your nervous system, not to numb your pain, but to transcend it. You no longer betray yourself to be accepted. You no longer shrink to be safe. You no longer chase connection from those disconnected from themselves. Instead, you anchor into your breath. You connect to your heart. You realign your energy with your highest truth. Because when you do that, you stop repeating cycles. You stop being the rescuer, the fixer, the overgiver, and you start being the creator. You begin creating a life where peace is the foundation, where your emotions are sacred messengers, where your energy is not up for negotiation, where your worth is not measured by how much you endure. So to the woman fighting the silent battle, let me remind you of one truth. You are not alone. You are not invisible. You are not defeated. You are becoming the most powerful version of yourself, and the world needs that version. Not the one who begs for love, not the one who overextends, but the one who has remembered, I am my own support. I am my own healer. I am the source. And when you become that, everything else begins to rise to meet you.